My dad said I was too emotional to run the family company and gave it to my brother. He had no idea I'd been making every major decision for 3 years. My name is Rebecca Walsh, and I spent 8 years watching my father build Walsh Construction into a regional powerhouse while secretly running every aspect of the business he thought I was too unstable to handle. What he didn't know was that his golden boy son couldn't balance a checkbook, let alone manage a multi-million-dollar operation. The company had been Dad's life since 1987 when he started with a pickup truck and a toolbox, building it into one of the largest commercial contractors in the tri-state area. By the time I graduated college with degrees in business and engineering, Walsh Construction employed over 200 people and handled projects worth tens of millions annually. Dad always assumed my brother Michael would take over eventually, despite Michael's complete lack of interest in anything beyond the bare minimum required to collect his paycheck. Meanwhile, I'd been working there every summer since high school, learning every department from the ground up while Dad dismissed my contributions as helping out, rather than real business experience. The turning point came during my senior year when Dad had his first heart attack at age 62. While he recovered in the hospital, Michael was supposed to handle operations, but within 2 weeks, everything started falling apart. Suppliers weren't getting paid, project schedules went haywire, and we nearly lost our biggest client due to missed deadlines and poor communication. That's when I stepped in unofficially, working 18-hour days to fix the disasters Michael had created through neglect and incompetence. I reorganized the project management system, negotiated with angry suppliers, and personally called every client to smooth over the problems. Dad never knew because Michael took credit for the recovery when Dad returned to work. See, Michael handled everything perfectly while I was out, Dad told people proudly. The boy's got real leadership instincts. Michael would smile and nod while I sat there knowing I'd saved the company from potential bankruptcy during those critical weeks. After that crisis, I realized Michael needed constant support to maintain even basic functionality, so I started ghost managing his responsibilities. Every morning, I'd arrive early to review his schedule and prepare briefings about what he needed to accomplish. I'd draft his emails, create his presentations, and even coach him on what to say during important meetings. The system worked because Michael was smart enough to recognize he was in over his head and grateful for the help, while Dad remained convinced his son was naturally gifted at business leadership. Meanwhile, I was officially just the operations coordinator, a position Dad created to keep me busy without giving me real authority. The financial analysis that convinced Dad to expand into renewable energy projects. I spent 3 months researching market trends and building financial models while Michael played golf. The new safety protocols that reduced our accident rate by 40%? I developed those after studying OSHA regulations and industry best practices for weeks. The contract negotiation strategy that landed us the Morrison Medical Center project, our biggest job ever. I wrote the entire proposal, created the pricing structure, and coached Michael through every meeting. When we won the $12 million contract, Dad took Michael out for a celebration dinner while I worked late finishing the project setup. Dad's favorite phrase was, "Michael's got the killer instinct for this business," usually followed by some comment about how I was too emotional or too sensitive for high-stakes decision-making. He'd point to Michael's calm demeanor during meetings as evidence of natural leadership, not realizing that Michael appeared calm because I'd prepared him for every possible question and scenario. The irony was that Dad valued the exact qualities in Michael that he criticized in me. When I showed passion for the business or got invested in solving problems, Dad called it emotional instability. When Michael displayed the same information I'd given him with practiced confidence, Dad called it executive presence. The breaking point came in early 2019 when Dad announced his retirement plans during our annual company meeting. He stood at the front of the conference room, looking out at our employees and key clients, and declared that Michael would be taking over as president and CEO within 6 months. Michael has proven himself as a natural leader who can handle pressure and make tough decisions, Dad said, while Michael sat beside him trying to look presidential. He's got the temperament and vision this company needs for the next generation. I sat in the back row feeling my chest tighten as Dad continued praising Michael's business instincts and strategic thinking, all qualities Michael had demonstrated only because I'd been feeding him information and strategies for years. The applause was enthusiastic because employees genuinely liked Michael as a person, even though they had no idea how little he actually contributed. After the meeting, I asked Dad if we could talk privately in his office. I closed the door and tried to explain that I'd been handling far more responsibility than my job title suggested, and that maybe we should discuss my role in the transition. Dad cut me off before I could finish. "Rebecca, I know you work hard and you'll always have a place here," he said in that patronizing tone I'd learned to hate. "But leadership isn't about working hard. It's about making decisions under pressure without getting emotional about it. Michael has that natural ability." When I tried to give specific examples of projects I'd managed or problems I'd solved, Dad dismissed them as supporting work, rather than real leadership. In his mind, I was a valuable assistant who helped Michael succeed, not someone capable of leading independently. That night, I went home to my apartment and made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing to work in Michael's shadow, I would document every aspect of my actual contributions and build evidence of what I'd really been doing for the company. If Dad wouldn't recognize my capabilities willingly, maybe I could prove them undeniably. I started by going through my computer files and pulling together every analysis, proposal, and strategic document I'd created over the previous 3 years. The evidence was overwhelming once I organized it systematically. Financial models that had guided major investment decisions, market research that had identified new opportunities, operational improvements that had saved hundreds of thousands in costs. Next, I compiled email threads showing how I'd coached Michael through negotiations, provided him with talking points for client meetings, and solved problems he couldn't handle independently. The pattern was clear and consistent. I would identify issues, develop solutions, and then help Michael present them as his own insights. The most damning evidence was a series of recorded phone calls I'd made to clients during various crises over the past 2 years. Dad had no idea I'd been the one maintaining those relationships when things went wrong, because Michael would claim credit during the follow-up meetings when everything was resolved. Armed with this documentation, I requested another meeting with Dad, this time bringing printed copies of everything I'd compiled. I spread the evidence across his desk and walked him through the timeline of my actual contributions versus Michael's official responsibilities. Dad's face went through several changes as he reviewed the materials. First confusion, then disbelief, then something that might have been recognition. But instead of acknowledging what the evidence showed, he got defensive. "This doesn't change anything," he said, pushing the papers back across his desk. "Supporting Michael is exactly what I'd expect from a good team player. It proves you work well under his leadership." I stared at him in disbelief. Even with documented proof that I'd been making the decisions Michael got credit for, Dad was reframing it as evidence of Michael's leadership rather than my capabilities. The mental gymnastics were breathtaking. "Dad, Michael didn't make these decisions," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I made them. He presented my work because I prepared him to do it. Without my support, he would have failed completely during your heart attack." Dad's expression hardened. "You're being emotional again, Rebecca. This is exactly what I'm talking about. A real leader doesn't need to take credit for every little contribution. Michael knows how to delegate effectively and build team loyalty." The conversation devolved from there as Dad became more entrenched in his position, and I became more frustrated trying to break through his willful blindness. Finally, he ended the meeting by saying that if I couldn't support Michael's leadership transition without causing drama, maybe I should consider whether Walsh Construction was the right place for me. That threat crystallized everything for me. Dad would rather lose me than admit he'd been wrong about Michael's abilities or my potential. I was being punished for succeeding too well in the shadows, making Michael look good at the cost of my own recognition. I walked out of Dad's office knowing that nothing I said or showed him would change his mind. His identity was too wrapped up in the narrative of Michael as his natural successor, and me as the emotional daughter who needed to be managed rather than empowered. That evening, I called my friend Sarah Kim, who worked as a recruiter for executive positions in construction and engineering. I explained my situation and asked if she knew of any opportunities that might match my actual experience rather than my official job title. Sarah laughed when I described the gap between my responsibilities and recognition. "Rebecca, you've been running a major construction company for 3 years. Every firm in the region would kill to hire someone with your track record if they knew what you'd actually accomplished." Within 2 weeks, Sarah had arranged interviews with 3 different companies, including Meridian Construction, Walsh Construction's biggest competitor. I updated my resume to reflect my actual contributions, using metrics and project outcomes that demonstrated real leadership experience rather than just supporting roles. The interview with Meridian's CEO, Patricia Morrison, was unlike anything I'd experienced at Walsh Construction. She asked detailed questions about my decision-making process, my approach to problem-solving, and my vision for the industry's future. For the first time in years, someone was evaluating my actual capabilities rather than dismissing them. "Your experience running operations at Walsh is impressive," Patricia said, reviewing my portfolio of completed projects. "But what interests me more is your strategic thinking about market expansion and operational efficiency. That's exactly what we need for our next growth phase." She offered me a position as Vice President of Operations with a 40% salary increase and equity participation in the company's profits. More importantly, she was offering me the chance to lead openly rather than from the shadows, making decisions and getting recognition for the results. I accepted the offer and submitted my resignation to Dad the next morning. His reaction was predictably dismissive. "I'm disappointed you're being so emotional about the transition," he said, not even asking where I was going or what role I'd been offered. "But if you need to prove something to yourself, I understand. Michael will be fine without you." Michael's reaction was different and more honest. He asked to meet me for coffee after work, and when we sat down, he looked genuinely worried. "Rebecca, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. How much of what I've been doing was actually your work?" I appreciated his directness and decided to give him the truth. "Most of it, Michael. The financial analysis, the strategic planning, the client relationship management. You're good at presenting and people like you, but the actual business decisions were mine." His face went pale as he processed the implications. "So when I take over next month, I'm going to be running a company I don't actually know how to run." It wasn't a question. I felt sorry for him because he'd been set up to fail by Dad's favoritism and unwillingness to provide him with real training or honest feedback about his capabilities. But I also couldn't continue sacrificing my career to protect him from consequences he needed to face. "Michael, you're smart enough to learn this business if you actually commit to it," I told him. "But you'll need to stop coasting and start taking ownership of your own development. Dad isn't helping you by giving you credit for work you didn't do." My last day at Walsh Construction was surreal. Dad treated it like I was going on vacation rather than leaving permanently, while Michael looked increasingly panicked as the reality of his situation sank in. Other employees threw me a small farewell party, several of them admitting they'd always known I was more involved than my title suggested. Starting at Meridian Construction felt like emerging from underwater after years of holding my breath. Patricia introduced me to the leadership team as their new VP of Operations, someone with extensive experience turning around struggling projects and implementing efficiency improvements, no qualifiers about being emotional or needing supervision. My first month, I tackled a problem project that had been hemorrhaging money and falling behind schedule. Using the same analytical approach I'd applied at Walsh Construction, I identified bottlenecks in the workflow, renegotiated supplier contracts, and restructured the management oversight. Within 6 weeks, the project was back on track and under budget. Patricia called me into her office after reviewing my first quarterly report. "Rebecca, these results are exactly what we hoped for when we hired you. You've demonstrated the kind of strategic leadership that builds companies." Meanwhile, Walsh Construction was struggling with Michael's transition more than anyone had anticipated. Through industry connections, I heard about missed deadlines, cost overruns, and client complaints that started almost immediately after Dad's retirement became official. The Morrison Medical Center project, the one I'd spent months planning and pricing, ran into serious problems when Michael couldn't manage the complexity of coordinating multiple subcontractors and regulatory requirements. The client threatened to terminate the contract unless Walsh could demonstrate competent project leadership immediately. Dad came out of retirement temporarily to handle the crisis, but the damage to the company's reputation was already done. Industry gossip spread quickly about Walsh Construction's declining performance under new leadership, with several long-term clients reconsidering their relationships. 3 months after I started at Meridian, Patricia asked me to lead our bid for a major municipal infrastructure project that Walsh Construction was also pursuing. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd be competing directly against my former company for a contract worth over $20 million. I assembled a team and spent 6 weeks developing a comprehensive proposal that addressed every aspect of the project requirements. We analyzed the technical specifications, created detailed timelines, and provided competitive pricing based on our operational efficiency improvements. The proposal was 200 pages of thorough professional work. The contract award ceremony was held at the municipal building with representatives from all the bidding companies present. When they announced that Meridian Construction had won the contract, I felt a surge of satisfaction that had nothing to do with beating Walsh Construction and everything to do with succeeding based on my actual capabilities. Dad was across the room with Michael, both of them looking stunned that they'd lost such a significant opportunity. Dad's expression was particularly confused because he couldn't understand how Meridian had outmaneuvered them so completely when Walsh had been the obvious choice for municipal contracts for years. After the ceremony, Dad approached me in the parking lot. "Rebecca, I heard you worked on Meridian's proposal," he said, his tone mixing accusation with bewilderment. "I hope you didn't use any proprietary information from your time with us." I looked at him steadily and said, "Dad, I use the same analytical skills and strategic thinking I always used. The difference is that now I get credit for the results instead of watching someone else present my work." He stood there for a moment, processing what I'd said. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his expression, as if he was beginning to question his assumptions about my capabilities and Michael's natural leadership. But instead of acknowledging that possibility, he doubled down on his original narrative. "Well, I hope you're happy causing problems for the family business. Michael is doing fine, and he'll prove himself once he gets more experience." 6 months later, Walsh Construction's performance problems had become impossible to ignore. They'd lost 3 major clients, had 2 projects terminated for poor management, and were facing potential legal action for breach of contract on the Morrison Medical Center job. Dad was forced to come out of retirement completely and resume day-to-day operations, while Michael was quietly moved to a business development role with no real authority. The company survived, but its reputation in the industry was severely damaged. During this period, Meridian Construction thrived under Patricia's leadership and my operational management. We completed every project on time and under budget, earned industry awards for safety and innovation, and expanded our market share significantly. I was promoted to senior vice president and given equity participation that made me a part owner of the company. The most satisfying moment came when we hired several employees who had left Walsh Construction due to management problems and declining morale. These were people who had worked with me for years and knew exactly what I was capable of contributing. "Rebecca, working here feels like how Walsh used to feel when you were really running things," one former colleague told me during a company meeting. "We always knew you were the one keeping everything organized behind the scenes." A year after leaving Walsh Construction, I was featured in Construction Executive magazine as one of the industry's rising leaders, with a full-page article about Meridian's operational improvements and market expansion. The article quoted Patricia extensively about my strategic vision and leadership capabilities. I sent a copy of the magazine to Dad with a simple note. "Thought you might be interested in reading about what emotional instability looks like in practice." I never heard back from him, but several people told me he'd been showing the article around town with a complicated expression on his face. The ultimate validation came when Walsh Construction approached Meridian about a potential partnership on a project they couldn't handle alone. Michael called me directly to discuss the possibility, his tone very different from our previous interactions. "Rebecca, I need to be honest with you," he said during our phone call. "The company is struggling without your behind-the-scenes work. Dad won't admit it, but I know the difference your absence has made. Would you consider some kind of consulting arrangement to help us through this rough patch?" I appreciated his honesty, but I had no interest in returning to a situation where my contributions would be minimized or attributed to someone else's leadership. "Michael, I'm committed to Meridian now, and frankly, I'm getting recognition for my work here that I never got at Walsh. You'll need to figure out your own path forward." The conversation ended amicably, but it confirmed what I'd suspected all along. My value to Walsh Construction had been real and significant, even if Dad had refused to acknowledge it officially. Without my support, Michael and the company both struggled to maintain the performance levels they'd achieved when I was managing operations from behind the scenes. 2 years later, Patricia announced her retirement and recommended that the board of directors promote me to CEO of Meridian Construction. At age 34, I became the youngest female CEO of a major construction company in our region, leading a firm that had grown 60% during my tenure. My first act as CEO was to implement a mentorship program for young women entering the construction industry, focusing on leadership development and ensuring that capable employees get recognition for their contributions regardless of their gender or family relationships. Dad attended the industry reception celebrating my promotion, standing in the back of the room while I gave my acceptance speech about building inclusive leadership and recognizing talent wherever it emerges. Our eyes met briefly across the crowded room, and for the first time, I saw something that might have been regret in his expression. After the reception, he approached me near the valet station. "Rebecca, I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've accomplished here," he said, his voice lacking its usual certainty. "Maybe I didn't see your potential clearly when you were working for us." It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get from him, and I appreciated the acknowledgement even though it came years too late to change our relationship. "Dad, I hope Michael finds his own way to success. Walsh Construction could still recover if you're willing to adapt to new approaches." He nodded slowly and said, "Maybe it's time for this old dog to learn some new tricks." Then he walked away toward his car, looking older and less sure of himself than I'd ever seen him. The irony wasn't lost on me that Dad's emotional daughter had built a more successful company than his naturally gifted son, using the same skills and instincts he'd dismissed as unsuitable for leadership. But the real satisfaction came from proving to myself that I could succeed openly rather than from the shadows. Today, Meridian Construction employs over 400 people and is recognized as one of the most innovative and efficiently run companies in our industry. Walsh Construction still exists, but it's smaller and less influential than it was during my anonymous years of behind-the-scenes management. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Dad had recognized my contributions and given me the leadership opportunity I'd earned through performance rather than gender expectations. But I'm grateful the situation forced me to find my own path, because building something from scratch with proper recognition has been more rewarding than fixing someone else's mistakes would have been. The experience taught me that sometimes the best response to being underestimated is not to prove people wrong, but to find places where your abilities are properly valued. Dad wasn't wrong that leadership requires emotional intelligence and the ability to make decisions under pressure. He was wrong about which child possessed those qualities.